People keep getting lost on easy trails, proof that nature doesn't need cliffs or bears to destroy your confidence. It just needs your sense of direction. And oh, it gets dumber from here. 1. A man once managed to get lost on a trail so flat and well-marked it could have doubled as a guided museum exhibit. The park staff described it as basically a sidewalk with opinions, yet this guy wandered off like a Roomba having a midlife crisis. His downfall began when he stopped to check out a cool rock, which apparently meant stepping directly over a clearly roped-off area and walking into a patch of bushes that had never asked for visitors. From there, he followed what he confidently declared a path, which was actually a drainage ditch lovingly designed to funnel water, not humans. He hiked along it for an hour before realizing that trails usually don't end at a concrete culvert filled with frogs judging you. When rangers finally found him, he said the signs were confusing, even though the signs literally had arrows, maps, color coding, and a cartoon mascot pointing in the correct direction like an enthusiastic kindergarten teacher. 2. A woman successfully got lost in the one place no one thought possible, a loop trail, a circle, a geometric shape famous for not having exits or forks. Rangers reported watching her go past the same bench 4 separate times, each pass more frustrated than the last, until she finally approached them, claiming the trail kept rearranging itself. The bench, by the way, had a giant plaque stating, "You are here," which she interpreted as some kind of motivational quote instead of the location indicator it was designed to be. She had also been wearing a fitness tracker that drew her path in real time, producing what looked like a chaotic doodle made by a toddler with a crayon and a vendetta. When someone pointed out the map on her wrist, she said she couldn't trust it because technology gets confused in nature, boldly implying that GPS satellites orbiting Earth were less reliable than her personal sense of direction, which at this point was demonstrably fictional. 3. A group of college students once got lost because they followed the loudest member of the group, traditionally the worst strategy for any mission involving navigation, logic, or basic survival instincts. Their self-appointed leader announced that he had a sixth sense for trails, then immediately demonstrated that sense by leading everyone straight into a thicket of poison ivy. When the actual trail markers appeared right beside them like beacons of common sense, he dismissed them as for beginners, insisting that real hikers follow the land. The land, however, was unimpressed, offering them nothing but rocks, bugs, and a declining sense of confidence. By the time they realized they'd been going in the wrong direction for 3 hours, they were dehydrated, itchy, and arguing about whether moss really does grow on the north side, or whether that was just something someone's uncle invented during a barbecue. Rangers later reported that the group had ended up a quarter mile from the parking lot the entire time. 4. A man got lost because he refused to believe the trail was as short as the map claimed. It was labeled easy, 0.8 miles, which his ego interpreted as an insult to his personal athletic legacy. So naturally, he decided to extend the trail himself by wandering off at random. He convinced himself the official path was too easy to be interesting, a philosophy that works fine for Netflix recommendations, but not for staying alive outdoors. He eventually located a narrow deer trail, mistook it for a secret expert route, and followed it with the confidence of someone who thinks nature appreciates ambition. The deer trail ended at a ravine, where he stood triumphantly like he'd discovered Machu Picchu, until he realized he had no earthly idea how to get back. His phone was fully charged, but he refused to call for help, because real hikers don't panic, which is ironic considering his Fitbit recorded the highest heart rate of his life during the ordeal. Rangers found him pacing in circles like a stressed-out mall Santa in December. 5. A woman got lost because she tried to follow her emotional connection to the forest, instead of the extremely visible arrows posted every 20 feet. She claimed the trail felt restrictive, which is generally the point. It keeps you from dying publicly and embarrassingly. But she saw it as a challenge to express her authentic wilderness self. She wandered off to be one with the trees, only to discover that the trees did not, in fact, want to be one with her, as evidenced by the scratches, spider webs, and a squirrel that threw debris at her with Olympic precision. She ignored the increasingly panicked sounds of her friends calling her name because she believed getting lost was part of the journey. Meanwhile, the Rangers, upon hearing this description, immediately rolled their eyes in synchronized despair. They found her after sunset, sitting cross-legged in a clearing, convinced she had found an ancient spiritual crossroads. It was a drainage basin for stormwater runoff. 6. A guy managed to get lost because he followed a printed map so old it still listed payphones. He had downloaded it from a suspicious website that specialized in outdated trail guides and occasionally inspirational quotes. When the modern trail markers around him didn't match his map, he confidently decided the park must have moved everything recently, because of course thousands of acres of forest simply rearrange themselves overnight. Rather than question his map, he questioned reality, wandering deeper into the woods looking for landmarks that hadn't existed since the Carter administration. Eventually, his map insisted he should be standing at a scenic overlook, but he found himself in front of a family of deer staring at him like he was the overdue punchline to a joke they'd been waiting to finish. When rangers found him, he proudly announced that his map had almost worked, proving that some people will blame the universe before admitting they downloaded the wrong PDF. 7. A man got lost because he followed his dog's sense of direction, which was bold considering the dog's previous achievements included eating crayons and being afraid of ceiling fans. When the dog pulled toward a side trail clearly marked closed for habitat restoration, the man interpreted this as destiny instead of canine chaos. He followed the dog with reverent trust, narrating the journey like they were discovering untouched wilderness, until the terrain subtly shifted from lush forest to unmaintained zone where plants act like bouncers. The dog, having no long-term goals, abruptly lost interest and sat down, leaving the man standing in waist-high brush wondering why the path no longer existed. He tried to use his phone, but had no service and zero confidence in his own ability to retrace steps. When the rescue team arrived, the dog greeted them as if nothing unusual had happened, while the man insisted the trail was poorly marked, despite the enormous closure sign visible from space. 8. A couple got lost because they decided to take just one shortcut, which is how every bad idea in history begins. The trail was clearly marked, clearly maintained, and clearly designed to prevent exactly what they were about to do. But they spotted a faint indentation in the grass, a footprint, an animal track, or perhaps just gravity doing its job, and declared it a faster route. The shortcut immediately turned into steep terrain, slippery rocks, and the kind of thorny plants that exist solely to remind humans they are soft, fragile creatures. They kept going because they were too embarrassed to turn back, each silently hoping the other would admit defeat. But pride is stronger than survival instincts. When they finally stopped, they realized they had no idea where the real trail was. Their water bottles were empty, and their GPS app insisted they were standing somewhere outside the known universe. Rangers found them bickering about whose idea it was, which experts agree is the universal soundtrack of amateur outdoor navigation. 9. A man got lost on an interpretive nature trail, a type specifically engineered to be impossible to misunderstand, because he treated the informational plaques as riddles instead of explanations. Each sign described local plants and animals, but he interpreted them as clues to a secret, hidden route. By the third plaque, he had convinced himself the park had installed a coded treasure hunt for those perceptive enough to notice. Soon he was crouching behind rocks, decoding arrow shapes, and wandering off trail to find symbolic meanings behind tree bark patterns. He walked past a bench. With a map, ignored a family clearly pointing out the correct direction, and kept muttering about unlocking the forest's design. By the time rangers intercepted him, he was ankle-deep in mud, holding a stick he believed was an ancient marker. They gently informed him the trail's deepest puzzle was identifying poison oak, which he had spectacularly failed. 10. A teenager got lost because he was too committed to filming a nature vlog and not committed at all to looking where he was going. He narrated confidently into his phone, gesturing dramatically while slowly drifting farther and farther from the actual trail, like a ship ignoring its lighthouse to chase a seagull. He was so focused on capturing authentic wilderness vibes that he didn't notice the shift from maintained pathway to dense underbrush that looked like a nature documentary's danger montage. When he finally stopped recording, he realized the trail was nowhere in sight, and that his phone battery, drained by cinematic aspirations, now had about 3 minutes of life left. He attempted to use those 3 minutes to send a dramatic farewell video to his followers, which unfortunately uploaded as a corrupted file. Rangers eventually found him perched on a log like a lost woodland influencer, rehearsing the apology video he planned to film once rescued. 11. A man got lost because he insisted on using a compass he didn't know how to read, a skill he believed would awaken his inner adventurer. The compass needle spun normally, but he interpreted every tiny movement as a spiritual sign rather than basic magnetism. He repeatedly changed direction based on how inspired he felt, which is not what compasses are designed for. Meanwhile, the trail markers, big, wooden, visually obvious, might as well have been written in invisible ink. At one point, he held the compass above his head as if altitude might teach it manners. By the time rangers reached him, he was wandering confidently south while insisting he was headed northwest because the energy feels right. The rangers did not bother explaining polarity. They simply guided him back as he continued praising the compass for revealing the path, unaware that the compass had been trying to get him to stop contradicting the laws of physics. 12. A woman got lost because she relied entirely on a navigation app that kept recalculating every time she drifted a few feet off course, which, impressively, she did constantly. The trail was so straightforward that even the birds seemed bored, but her phone kept chirping rerouting, which she interpreted as urgent instructions rather than the device politely screaming for stability. Instead of walking the simple loop, she followed each recalculated direction like it was divine prophecy, zigzagging through trees in what looked like an interpretive dance inspired by poor decision-making. Eventually, the app froze, leaving her in silence. Convinced she'd reached some kind of digital dead zone of destiny, she kept wandering until she found herself at a steep slope entirely unrelated to anything on the official map. When rangers found her, she explained that her phone had given up, which, in their professional opinion, was the most accurate part of the story. 13. A guy got lost because he refused to believe the trail could possibly be as obvious as it looked. The wide open path seemed too easy, so he convinced himself the real trail must be hidden, because nothing says adventure like ignoring reality. He wandered off searching for a secret entrance, as though hiking trails operate like speakeasies. At one point, he tapped on tree trunks, expecting one of them to swing open. He followed a squirrel for 20 minutes, hoping it was a guide, which the squirrel immediately disproved by climbing a tree and abandoning him mid-journey. After an hour, he became convinced he'd discovered an uncharted route, only to emerge onto a picnic area located a mere 400 feet from where he started. Rangers spotted him, walking in dramatic slow motion, like he'd crossed Antarctica, when in fact he had circled the parking lot with gusto. 14. A family got lost because they decided to let their youngest child lead the adventure, which is adorable in theory and catastrophic in practice. The child made decisions based on colors he liked rather than actual trail markers, at one point confidently turning left because that tree looks friendly. The family, determined to encourage independence, followed him with the kind of naive optimism usually reserved for sitcom plots. They strolled through areas that didn't resemble trails so much as inspirational posters warning against poor choices. When the child eventually announced he was bored and refused to continue, the family finally looked around and realized the well-maintained path was nowhere in sight. Their GPS had no service, their snacks were gone, and morale had collapsed faster than a folding lawn chair at a tailgate. Rangers found them negotiating with the child like diplomats trying to end a small indoor rebellion. 15. A man got lost because he believed he could visualize the trail after glancing at the map once, a strategy that works in video games but collapses instantly in real ecosystems. His internal map was less cartography and more abstract art. He remembered the trail having a curve and a tree, which did nothing to help him in a forest containing approximately 11 billion trees, all of which curve in some direction. He strode confidently down the wrong path, making bold declarations like, "This feels right," despite no evidence supporting that statement. When the terrain shifted into a rocky incline that absolutely did not appear on the map, he concluded the park had mislabeled the difficulty rating. He attempted to retrace his steps, only to realize he'd taken so many unnecessary detours he'd essentially auditioned for. The role of forest confusion personified. Rangers retrieved him while he was lecturing a tree stump about poor trail design. 16. A pair of friends got lost because they were too busy arguing about which of them had the better natural instincts. One claimed to have a hunter's intuition inherited from his grandfather, while the other insisted he possessed a mountain sense, whatever that means. The debate became so heated, they walked straight past the massive wooden sign marking a trail junction, marching onward into a direction neither of them had intended. They hiked for nearly 2 hours, each refusing to admit they were off course, each insisting the other's sense was inferior. When they finally stopped to reassess, they realized they couldn't even agree on which way they had come from. leading to a second, equally useless argument. Rangers found them standing back to back like dueling philosophers trying to outthink geography. After escorting them back, one ranger reportedly said, "The mountain was right." They weren't. 17. A man got lost because he was so committed to disconnecting from technology that he left behind his phone, his map, and apparently his grip on common sense. His plan was to experience the trail the way early explorers did, ignoring the fact that early explorers also got lost constantly and often catastrophically. He followed what he assumed were natural signs, sunlight patterns, bird calls, and the vague hope that the universe favored him personally. Meanwhile, the actual trail, clearly marked, easy to follow, and specifically created to prevent situations like this, was left behind as he pursued the wilderness equivalent of improv theater. By midday, he realized he had no idea where he'd gone, but refused to panic because he believed panic feeds the forest, a philosophy no one asked for. When rangers located him, he was rationing a granola bar he didn't remember packing, convinced he'd been out there for days when it had been 3 hours and 40 minutes. 18. A man got lost because he stopped to take a picture of a squirrel and then confidently followed the squirrel instead of the trail, as if small woodland rodents routinely lead guided tours. The squirrel, of course, had zero interest in mentoring him and was mostly concerned with finding a nut or overthrowing a bird feeder somewhere. But this man stomped behind it like an apprentice monk trailing a wise master, ignoring the increasingly irritated rustling of the underbrush. When the squirrel darted up a tree, he interpreted that as a sign to keep going straight, which is exactly how he walked himself into a patch of briars that had not been expecting company. By the time he realized he was lost, he was covered in scratches, holding a cracked phone with no service, and blaming the squirrel for changing direction, which is bold coming from a person who outsourced his navigation skills to a creature that panics at its own reflection. 19. A woman managed to get lost because she mistook a trail maintenance vehicle path for the actual trail, despite every sign, arrow, and map insisting otherwise. She explained later that the vehicle path felt more intentional, which is an interesting interpretation considering it was basically 2 muddy tire ruts leading into a mess of fallen branches and old equipment. She followed this industrial scar through the forest with the confidence of someone convinced the park kept its secret vistas behind the scenes, and she continued even when she passed a wheelbarrow full of broken stakes and a sign reading "Service Access Only." Instead of turning around, she assumed service access was a term for advanced hikers. When she finally attempted to retrace her steps, she found herself surrounded by identical piles of branches, all of which looks like props from a survival show filmed by interns. Rangers found her pacing in slow circles, like she was waiting for the forest to apologize. 20. A guy got lost because he turned his phone to airplane mode to save battery. A fine idea until he also turned off his screen, stuffed the phone in his pack, and congratulated himself for mastering outdoor minimalism. With no map, no markers, and absolutely no internal compass, he proceeded to hike in whatever direction felt emotionally satisfying at the time. He later described this approach as intuitive navigation, which is a generous way of saying he was guessing aggressively. Whenever he came across a part of the trail that seemed too well maintained, he assumed it couldn't possibly be correct and veered off toward rougher ground to pursue what he thought was a more authentic wilderness route. Hours later, when he finally decided he might be lost, he pulled out his phone and discovered he had drained the battery by recording accidental pocket videos of himself breathing heavily. Rangers found him sitting beside a stump, whispering motivational quotes at his lifeless phone. 21. A couple got lost because they tried to recreate a famous hiking influencer's route from memory, despite neither of them remembering the route correctly, the influencer having hiked in a completely different state, and neither of them possessing even a basic sense of topography. Their plan was essentially to wander until something looked like the photo, but the only thing they consistently recognized was disappointment. Every time the terrain didn't match their fantasy, they blamed the weather, the lighting, or the ecosystem for being different today, as if nature was deliberately sabotaging their content schedule. They ignored every official marker because, according to them, real explorers don't follow signs, which is true only in the sense that real explorers often vanished mysteriously. When rangers located them, the couple complained that the park didn't curate the scenery properly, which is perhaps the most impressive misunderstanding of national land management ever recorded. 22. A man got lost because he followed a bird call that he was convinced belonged to a rare species, even though the call was extremely common, extremely loud, and extremely similar to the sound of a car alarm having an existential breakdown. He left the trail to investigate, imagining himself documenting a groundbreaking discovery, despite having zero bird knowledge and even less wilderness sense. As he wandered deeper, the call echoed unpredictably, which he attributed not to acoustics, but to the bird moving strategically. Soon he was stumbling through underbrush, chasing sound waves like a detective in a nature documentary produced on a dare. When he finally realized he was lost, he attempted to communicate with the bird by whistling back, producing noises so awful that an actual bird dive-bombed him in annoyance. Rangers found him hiding behind a fallen log, claiming the bird was testing him, proving he had learned absolutely nothing from the ordeal. 23. A family got lost because they trusted a paper map printed on the back of a children's activity brochure from the visitor center, the kind with cartoon animals, decorative borders, and a dotted line representing the main trail that was more symbolic than geographical. They followed this cheerful cartoon route with complete confidence, despite the fact that none of the trees had smiley faces and the cartoon bear greeting them on the map did not exist in the real forest. When they reached a junction that didn't appear on the brochure, they debated whether the map was supposed to be metaphorical, before simply choosing the direction that seemed friendlier. Unsurprisingly, this led them into a confusing maze of unofficial footpaths, all of which looked like the type of shortcuts invented by people who eventually get rescued. By the time rangers arrived, the family was trying to compare real rocks to cartoon rocks to re-establish their location, a technique that has never impressed geologists. 24. A man got lost because he took off his glasses to feel more present, apparently forgetting that his glasses were not decorative, but the only reason he could see more than 3 feet ahead. He stuffed them in his pocket, took a deep breath, and confidently walked forward into a world that now resembled a watercolor painting created by someone who had never seen trees. Trail markers became smudges, signs became abstract art, and other hikers blended into the general background like confused forest ghosts. When he eventually realized he had wandered in the wrong direction, he tried to read the map without his glasses, holding it close enough to his face that he might as well have been smelling it for clues. Rangers found him slowly rotating in place, squinting at a stump he believed was a trail kiosk. When asked why he didn't just put the glasses back on, he said he didn't want to break the moment. 25. A woman got lost because she tried to follow the natural flow of the land, which sounds poetic until you realize the land flows in every direction at once and does not offer refunds. She stepped off the trail because she felt the ground was telling her to go right, ignoring the fact that the ground was sloped that way because gravity exists. She wandered past bushes, boulders, and a very clear trail marker pointing the opposite direction, all while narrating her journey like she was in an inspirational documentary about personal transformation. Unfortunately, the only thing transforming was her trajectory, which zigzagged wildly until she found herself boxed in by thorny shrubs that had absolutely no interest in participating in her creative journey. She insisted she wasn't lost, she was discovering a new route, which is exactly what people say before rangers discover them 10 feet away from the real trail, exhausted and utterly betrayed by the concept of terrain. 26. A man got lost because he assumed that since the trail looked simple on Google Earth, it must be equally simple in real life. He failed to consider that Google Earth does not display incline, underbrush density, or how easily humans panic when trees all start looking the same. He charged into the hike with confidence inspired entirely by satellite imagery, which is a bit like planning a road trip based on a child's crayon drawing of the continental United States. When he reached a fork in the trail that wasn't visible from space, he picked the direction that seemed more photogenic. Hours later, he was wandering through a densely forested area he referred to as the hidden zone, which rangers later identified as a random patch of woods located embarrassingly close to the main path. By the time he was rescued, he had developed a personal vendetta against Google Earth for misrepresenting the situation. Chapter 27. A couple got lost because they were arguing too passionately about whether the mountain range in the distance was the same one featured in a documentary they had half-watched months earlier. Their debate grew so heated, they stopped paying attention to the actual trail and instead walked wherever their indignation pointed them. At one point, they stopped in the middle of a clearing to take pictures to analyze later, ignoring the fact that their backs were no longer facing the direction they came from. Their argument spiraled into a discussion about film accuracy, camera angles, and whether nature could be dramatic enough to match the documentary footage. By the time they realized they were lost, they had circled the same patch of trees 3 times, like the world's least intimidating search party. Rangers eventually escorted them out as they continued debating the mountain's cinematic potential, neither acknowledging that the real drama had been their navigational choices. 28. A man got lost because he believed he could smell the trail, an ability he claimed to have developed through deep nature connection exercises, which may work fine for detecting candles at gift shops, but not for locating designated walking paths. He walked with his eyes half closed, inhaling the air like he was evaluating a glass of mediocre wine, insisting he could sense the pathway energy. What he actually sensed was the unmistakable aroma of decomposing leaves, which exist everywhere. He turned confidently toward a slightly stronger scent, unaware that he was tracking the wind patterns rather than any actual trail. Eventually, he stumbled into a marshy area that smelled significantly stronger, which he misinterpreted as confirmation. When rangers arrived, guided partly by his increasingly dramatic vocalizations about trusting the earth, they found him ankle-deep in mud and still insisting his nose had almost succeeded. 29. A woman got lost because she wore noise-canceling headphones and didn't hear the obvious sounds that usually help people stay oriented, like other hikers, rushing creeks, or the ranger who called after her when she missed a turn. She was listening to a podcast about productivity, which feels like an ironic soundtrack for someone who spent 2 hours efficiently walking in the wrong direction. When she finally removed her headphones, she realized the forest around her was not the forest she had started in, a detail she found mildly concerning. She attempted to retrace her steps, but soon learned that forests do not provide breadcrumb trails, especially when you've been marching through them like a determined but misguided Roomba. When found, she was sitting on a log recharging her headphones using a solar panel, ready to continue her journey of blissful sensory isolation. 30. A man got lost because he used a hiking blog written by someone whose entire personality revolved around giving dangerously vague advice. The blog contained phrases like, "Follow your instincts," "The trail is obvious once you feel the rhythm," and "Don't overthink it," which are not helpful instructions for avoiding death in the woods. The man followed these poetic yet useless directions faithfully, eventually reaching a section where the blogger had written, "Take the path that calls to you." Unfortunately, multiple paths called to him, mostly because he was dehydrated and starting to hallucinate motivational messages in the leaves. When rangers located him, he explained he had simply misinterpreted the vibe, which, while true, was not a recognized cause of rescue deployment. 31. A group of coworkers got lost during a team-building hike because they all assumed someone else was in charge of navigation, resulting in a silent, collective confidence that evaporated the moment they reached a trail split. Nobody wanted to admit they had no idea where they were going, so they walked forward together like a migrating herd of denial. Every time a question arose, "Are we on track? Did we pass this tree before? Why does this look unfamiliar?" They simply answered with professional-sounding phrases like, "Let's stay agile and we'll align soon." Eventually, they reached a dead end that forced them to confront the reality that their synergy had led them into a thicket of thorn bushes. Rangers found them attempting to conduct a post-incident analysis, which is corporate for "we messed up spectacularly." 32. A man got lost because he assumed the sun would guide him, despite not knowing where the sun rises, where it sets, or how time works in basic relation to direction. He marched forward with absolute confidence, periodically glancing upward like the sun was contractually obligated to reassure him. He walked east thinking it was west, west thinking it was north, and north thinking it was metaphorical. When clouds rolled in and blocked the sun, he interpreted this as the sky testing his resolve, not a meteorological event. Hours later, thoroughly disoriented, he attempted to sense magnetic energy, which resulted only in him waving his arms around until a ranger spotted him and assumed he was signaling distress. The ranger later described him as philosophically brave, but geographically hopeless. 33. A woman got lost because she followed a stranger who looked like he knew what he was doing, a criteria that apparently consisted of wearing hiking boots and walking briskly. She shadowed him from a distance, convinced he possessed some profound wilderness wisdom, when, in fact, he was extremely lost and too embarrassed to admit it. Eventually, he noticed she was following him, assumed she knew the way, and began following her pace, creating a loop of mutual delusion in which neither party had a clue where they were going. The two of them wandered side by side for nearly an hour, each hoping the other would have a sudden flash of clarity. Rangers found them standing in silence, facing two diverging paths, each waiting for the other to make a decision that would almost certainly be wrong. 34. A guy got lost because he tried to use a smartwatch navigation feature that required cell service, which he did not have, but which he believed he could manifest through sheer focus. Every time the map failed to load, he assumed he just needed to stand in a different pose, arms raised, chin lifted, 1 foot forward, as if satellites were judging his presentation. He tried hilltops, clearings, and once even climbed a boulder to increase connection, only to discover his watch still displayed nothing but a spinning wheel of technological disappointment. Meanwhile, the clearly marked trail behind him grew fainter with every misguided attempt at spiritual Wi-Fi alignment. When Rangers eventually retrieved him, he was waving his watch at the sky like an angry wizard threatening the clouds. 35. A man got lost because he insisted the forest was just like an open-world game and assumed all trails would magically reconnect the way digital maps do, which is adorable considering the real world does not autocorrect your stupidity. He ran ahead of his group shouting things like, "I'm discovering the hidden route," despite the fact that the hidden route was, in reality, a steep hillside populated entirely by thorn bushes with no interest in collaborating on his quest. When he finally realized he was alone, he attempted to fast travel by walking in a straight line, right into a swampy depression that smelled like disappointment and mosquito ambition. By the time Rangers located him, he had collected several sticks he called loot, which they wisely did not question because nothing is more fragile than a grown man's imaginary level-up system failing in real time. 36. A woman got lost because she saw a deer standing off-trail and decided to follow it under the assumption that animals know the safest routes, which is technically true if you're also a deer and capable of bounding through obstacles at 40 miles per hour. She tiptoed after the deer in National Geographic slow motion, ignoring the fact that the deer looked at her with the same confused disdain someone reserves for a stranger who insists on joining their morning jog. Predictably, the deer vanished instantly, leaving her with nothing but a cluster of identical trees and the growing realization that Disney has lied to her repeatedly. When she finally called for help, she whispered into the phone like she was in a hostage situation, insisting she didn't want to disturb the wildlife, even though the wildlife had already filed her under "not our problem." 37. A father got lost because he refused to admit he'd taken the wrong turn in front of his children, which instantly transformed the hike into an unofficial, pride-based expedition. Instead of acknowledging the giant trail marker he ignored, he doubled down by pointing to random hills and declaring, "That's where the trail reconnects," with the confidence of a man who had never once been correct about topography. His kids watched silently as he insisted the sun was in the wrong place today, a complaint typically reserved for Greek tragedies and people who wake up late. Eventually, the youngest child mutinied and begged him to check the map, which he did upside down for a full 5 minutes before realizing he couldn't read it at all. Rangers found the entire family standing at the edge of a ravine while the father tried to convince them the route was expert level. 38. A pair of tourists got lost because they were convinced the park brochure's estimated hike time was wrong and wanted to beat the record, as if the forest was running a competitive leaderboard. They speedwalked past every sign, viewpoint, and warning with the focus of marathon runners chasing a sponsorship deal. Unfortunately, hiking while staring exclusively at your stopwatch means you eventually look up to discover you've unintentionally sprinted down the wrong branch of the trail system and into a network of switchbacks that seem designed to punish hubris. When exhaustion hit, they realized they didn't remember the last time they saw an actual marker, but continued hiking anyway because turning around would ruin their progress metrics, which is a deeply corporate approach to outdoor survival. Rangers later found them sitting on a log calculating their pace as if the data mattered more than the fact that they were completely and impressively lost. 39. A man got lost because he attempted to use the stars for navigation despite being unable to identify a single constellation beyond the one that looks like a frying pan, which is not helpful on cloudy afternoons. He declared he was tapping into ancient human instincts, though the only instincts visibly present were stubbornness and a profound overestimation of his own abilities. He wandered through the forest muttering about Polaris while confidently pointing at random bright spots that turned out to be airplane lights, which he dismissed as temporary celestial disruptions. When rangers found him sitting on a rock waiting for the sky to reset, they gently informed him that using the stars requires knowledge, not vibes. He stared at them in disbelief, as if astronomy was supposed to work like a horoscope, automatically and for everyone. 40. A woman got lost because she refused to believe the laminated map provided by the park and instead trusted a more authentic hand-drawn map she bought from a gift shop that specialized in whimsical stationery. The map featured adorable illustrations of foxes, mushrooms, and vaguely defined trails that curled like decorative ribbon. It was cute, sure, but only if your goal was to get lost artistically. She followed the map with literary devotion, insisting she would recognize landmarks when she saw them, but the only thing recognizable was her growing frustration. Each time she reached a crossroads, her map depicted as a doodled swirl of flowers. When rangers finally tracked her down, she held up the map and asked, genuinely confused, why the forest didn't match the intention of the artwork. 41. A man got lost because he wanted to walk in silence and trust intuition, which is a poetic sentiment until you realize intuition is useless if your brain is actively mistaking tree shadows for directional signs. He closed his eyes frequently to listen to the earth, which mostly resulted in him tripping over roots while claiming the ground was sending mixed signals. He explained later that he felt the forest was guiding him, a conclusion he reached after following a gust of wind that pointed him directly into a thicket so dense it looked like nature's version of industrial-grade barbed wire. When rangers found him, he was meditating. Beside a boulder he believed was a guardian spirit, which, in their professional assessment, was actually just a rock shaped slightly like a potato. 42. A mother got lost because she insisted on narrating the hike like a motivational audiobook for her children, to the point where she became so invested in her own dramatic storytelling that she missed the obvious turn markers entirely. She marched forward describing each tree as a symbol of resilience, and each clearing as the metaphorical path of destiny, which is beautiful but functionally useless when you are, in fact, supposed to turn left at the wooden sign shaped like an arrow. Her children eventually asked if she was sure they were going the right way, which she interpreted as a request for more story rather than concern for their literal physical direction. By the time rangers intercepted them, she was halfway through a speech about embracing the unknown, which the rangers politely reframed as finding the parking lot before sunset. 43. A group of friends got lost because they all decided to split up just for a moment to take better photos, an idea that has historically never worked in any forest, movie, or scenario involving oxygen. Each person walked off to find the perfect angle, unknowingly creating a human fractal of poor choices, wandering deeper into the woods while assuming everyone else would regroup through telepathy. When they eventually tried to find each other, they discovered there is no elegant system for locating friends in the wild besides shouting, "I'm over here," and hoping your voice doesn't echo off 17 unrelated trees. Rangers located the group by following the sound of 6 separate people arguing over who wandered the farthest, which is a bizarre competition nobody should attempt to win. 44. A man got lost because he believed he could feel magnetic north, which would have been impressive if the sensation he was following wasn't just mild dehydration paired with a dramatic personality. He walked in long, sweeping arcs across the trail, pausing occasionally to tilt his head like a puzzled golden retriever. When questioned later, he explained that he sensed a pull in a particular direction, which turned out to be the push of the wind hitting only one side of his sweat-soaked shirt. He discovered none of this on his own, of course. Rangers had to explain it after finding him circling a boulder he believed was true north incarnate. He accepted the correction begrudgingly, staring at the rock like it had lied to him personally. 45. A couple got lost because they were wearing matching shirts that said "Adventure awaits," which became a self-fulfilling prophecy in the worst possible way when they started following each other instead of the trail. Each assumed the other was paying attention, but the only things they actually noticed were their own witty shirt slogans reflected in every photo. They spent 45 minutes posing in scenic spots without realizing each pose took them slightly farther from the main path until they were technically exploring a drainage corridor decorated with poison ivy and one deeply unimpressed raccoon. When rangers found them, they were attempting to take a triumphant selfie with the caption, "Found a secret spot," which the rangers diplomatically suggested changing to something less incriminating. 46. A man got lost because he decided to hike while live streaming the entire experience, hoping to inspire his followers with motivational commentary about conquering nature. Unfortunately, nature did not appreciate being conquered and responded by rearranging the man's sense of direction through a series of subtly wrong turns he didn't notice because he was too busy reading comments. His viewers tried to warn him he had wandered off trail, but he interpreted their messages as trolling and told them to trust the process, shortly before tripping over a root on camera and dropping his phone into a patch of ferns that swallowed it like a judgmental green abyss. When rangers found him, he asked if they could say something inspirational for the next stream, which they declined with the kind of professional politeness reserved for people who clearly require adult supervision. 47. A group of teens got lost because they attempted to use drone footage to navigate the trail from the air, which sounds smart until you realize none of them knew how to fly a drone, interpret drone footage, or understand that trees look identical from above. They launched the drone with great ceremony, only to crash it almost immediately into a pine tree where it perched like a scolding owl. Instead of giving up, they evaluated the 2 blurry seconds of footage they had captured, insisting the faint shapes were totally helpful. Those shapes were later identified as clouds. The teens then wandered in the direction they thought the drone had pointed, which was pure conjecture and mostly downhill. Rangers eventually found them discussing who should attempt to climb the tree and retrieve the drone, proving that escalation was their primary strategy. 48. A woman got lost because she tried to navigate using the shape of distant mountain silhouettes, described in a travel blog written by someone whose greatest qualification appeared to be owning a camera and being extremely confident. She rotated in place, comparing each ridgeline to the poetic descriptions in the post: a gentle swooping arc, a proud angular stance, the sleeping giant, none of which translated into actual geographic clarity. When every mountain eventually started looking like a giant sleeping something, she chose a direction purely out of aesthetic preference. Unfortunately, she picked the direction featuring a ravine cleverly disguised as depth. By the time rangers found her, she was angrily rereading the blog and accusing the mountains of having changed their vibe. 49. A man got lost because he dismissed every official sign as corporate trail design, claiming the park system was trying to control his experience. A bold stance from someone whose primary wilderness skill was pretending he knew what moss orientation meant. He ignored arrows, junction markers, and even the helpful hiker who politely told him he was walking the wrong way, responding only with a smug, "That's what they want you to think." He then strode confidently into an area clearly labeled Restoration in Progress, which he believed was code for real adventurers only. Rangers discovered him attempting to climb a partially fallen tree he thought was a natural bridge, and even though they rescued him quickly, he insisted he had been just about to find the hidden path, which was true only in the sense that he was hidden and on a path to nowhere. 50. A family got lost because they relied entirely on the oldest child's claim that he had earned a Junior Ranger badge years earlier, which everyone interpreted as an actual qualification instead of something handed out for not littering and identifying a duck. The child directed them with the authority of a seasoned guide, pointing dramatically at random features like that important-looking rock and the tree that definitely points north. The parents followed because nothing strengthens denial like wanting your kid to be gifted. Predictably, the child led them through a combination of guesswork and enthusiasm straight into a thicket so dense the family had to crab walk to get through it. When rangers appeared, the child loudly insisted he almost solved it, while the parents apologized using the universal tone of adults who realized they trusted a certificate printed in Comic Sans. 51. A man earned the crown of getting lost in the dumbest way possible when he confidently followed his own footprints backward, unaware they belonged to him, creating a perfect loop of self-inflicted confusion. He saw the prints, gasped with relief, and announced he had found someone else's trail, then proceeded to follow them for nearly an hour, while giving himself motivational speeches about teamwork and human resilience. Each time the footprints doubled back, he assumed the mystery hiker was strategically scouting, never once considering the simpler truth. He was tracking the world's most confused mammal, himself. When rangers finally located him walking the same loop for the 7th time, he declared proudly that he had almost caught up to the guy. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. He just never realized the guy he was chasing was the same one responsible for every disastrous decision he'd made that day. That's our grand tour of people versus basic direction. Nature didn't stand a chance. Drop your favorite disaster in the comments and vote for the dumbest. more chaos incoming.